AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Our host brings you the leading minds in AI, sharing their story, their success, and their advice. Focusing on fast-tracking you to the top, AI in Action cuts through the hype to help you kickstart your data science career. To listen to the latest AI in Action podcast, head over to www.alldus.com/podcast or subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Podcasts.
You're listening to AI in Action. I'm your host, JP Valentine. Our guest today is Alessio Fanelli. Alessio is the Vice President at 645 Ventures. Alessio, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, JP.
Of course, it's our pleasure. So, Alessio, let's start with yourself. Can you give us a brief background of your career, where you first got started, and walk us through, your journey from starting off in hands-on tech into now working for a tech and AI-focused VC company?
Yeah, sure. So my background is a little unusual. So I was born and raised in Rome. I studied computer science in school. So studied there with one of my co-founders or friends at the time. We started a company called Smart Torby, which was a open source home automation ecosystem. We basically did open source hardware, open source software, like 3D designs, like everything to let people build automation at home. And our plan was, to build a company around it, but turns out open source software is hard. Open source hardware is even worse. So we ended up sunsetting that, but it was a great experience. Kind of gave me an insight into the entrepreneurial journey, which is something that really stuck with me. After that, I started working remotely for a bunch of startups in the US. My interest has always been building products, kind of like getting things done. The way I started with programming was building mods for Pro Evolution Soccer, which was one of my hobbies. And so I always look for that 0-to-1 environment where you can wear a lot of hats and really have fun building things that people love. At the end of the day, that's what really motivates me. So as I got further into my career, one of the things I was thinking through is, you're a company's 2-3 years, and then it starts to get either large or it goes out of business with startups. And I was thinking through, how can I have a job that allows me to kind of like repeat this process in a more, horizontal way, like doing it with a lot of people at once. And I found out about 645 Ventures through actually a tweet of a person named Shai Goldman, who works at SVB. I used to follow him because he's a big basketball fan. And then he tweeted out about the 645 Ventures Engineering Fellowship. I applied while I was still living in Italy. So the fellowship was a part-time position. So I was doing that alongside another consulting job. And this was when we were still in our first fund. So the firm was founded 7 years ago now. And our first fund was 7 million. That's when I joined. I really started helping build all of the software that we use internally. That does everything from helping us source deals, manage deals, be productive, like do a lot of work for us. And then through the years, we started growing as a fund. So our second fund was 40 million. That was around 2018. And at that time, I decided to move to the US. So I moved to New York City in the fall of 2018.
Amazing.
And then, we closed our third fund at the end of last year, which is 160 million. And now, I'm a VP on the team, and my role has kind of evolved from just the engineering part to also being on the investment team. The technical skill that I have really resonates with founders, and I love kind of working with them, being in the trenches, building product, thinking about go-to-market. And then here we are today.
Thank you for that, Alessio. I appreciate you sort of giving that background. Quite an interesting journey from hands-on engineer to now finding yourself as a VP of a VC firm who specialize in backing exciting tech firms. So just to give a sense of the growth that 645 has had over the 7 years and the size of the portfolio now, could you give us a high-level view of what the strategy is? How many companies you're involved in, and what's the decision criteria for when you guys assess what tech and data companies to back?
Yeah, so over the last 7 years, we've backed, I think, around 45 companies. It's the number, one more, one less. And our strategy has evolved. In Fund 1, it was a proof of concept fund. We were really trying to prove out this software-enabled venture capital strategy. Our portfolio was pretty generalist, so we had companies across different categories. We have a company called GoBelly, which got pretty large, which is a nationwide food delivery marketplace. We have a company called Iterable in the sales and marketing category. We have Nanit, which is a technology for baby monitoring, from cameras to tech-enabled wear. So it was pretty broad. And then kind of as we start growing the fund, we got more thematic. So nowadays we have 4 main investment themes, one of which is personalized consumer. So one of our big belief is that the more data gets created, the more consumer experiences should be tailored to them. So one example I always have, I have season tickets to the Brooklyn Nets. I love going to sports games. Whenever I go on StubHub, like they always show me the cheapest ticket. They don't show me where I usually like to sit. And I think there's a lot that can be done in different areas where using past consumer data can really help you inform, products to have a better experience. Like a good example is Netflix, Spotify. They always try to show you content relatable to you. I think a lot more industries are going to do this, especially like travel, things that in the past have mostly been value driven, so it's usually like find the cheapest price. I think they're going to start moving into finding the best fit for your budget and your interests. Another one is citizen professionals. So if you think about software, like what it has really done is democratizing access to knowledge. So if you 20 years ago, like if you needed to do your taxes, you probably needed an accountant. Nowadays, if you're a small business, you can leverage software to do that very easily without paying anybody. And we think with the rise of machine learning and kind of like embedded intelligence, there's going to be a lot more opportunities for people that are non-technical to achieve very difficult tasks by leveraging software to replace that knowledge. So this is an area where we're, actively looking to invest. And I think there's, categories that are also not necessarily AI driven, but more productivity driven that enable people. So Shopify is like a good example, like letting small businesses create very professional websites, create, payment systems and everything without requiring any technical knowledge. Personally, I lead the charge on our engineering value chain revolution team. So if you think about every company is a software company, like the supply chain of the past now becomes what we call the value chain of the engineering team. So how do we help engineers be more productive? How do we help them build software that is more reliable? And this also applies, of course, to data scientists that are kind of like, the new wave of engineering for data-driven products. And we see a lot there in terms of helping them have more structured toolkits. If you think about software engineering, you have pretty deep, version control support. You have a lot of things that for data scientists are just not there. And we think the next, 5 to 10 years, you'll see a big increase in tooling for them on model versioning, data version control. There's kind of like a lot that needs to be built, which we're pretty excited about. And then the last thing we have is SaaS for the second wave. So there's markets that have historically been kind of like disregarded by technology because they might not be as sexy, but you can build very large businesses on it. Like one example is one of our companies called Squire. They do software for barbershops, for example. Like the founders, one thing they did is buy an actual barbershop just to learn how they're run. And then they use that experience to build software to, help other barbershops around the country be more efficient. So those are kind of like the 4 main themes. And in terms of when we come in, it's usually seed and Series A. So the company might be pre-product. They might have a product out with some revenue, or they might have, a lot of revenue growing fast. And in that case, we do a larger Series A round to help them get to the growth stage. But we can be pretty flexible. I feel like every founder has a different story. So we like to come into it with an open mind and really hear what their journey was.
No, thank you for that. It's helpful just to see it through your eyes and how you identify companies that you want to back and support. So As your background is engineering, and you do a lot more than just select the companies and sit on the board, can you give us some insight into what are the common threads that make these portfolio companies successful with the use of their data science? And when you're advising them, what are the key things that stand out to you to help them structure a good data science team?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think this is very much evolving as more VCs get more data savvy. So in the past, people were mostly focused on the financials, kind of like what's the growth, what's the productivity of your sales team. As we move into this bottoms up motion where you start the sales motion as like one person, kind of like signing up for the product and then kind of expanding there, the things that you need to look at are a little different. So you really got to understand what's the kind of like the feedback loop of your product. Like, when do people get satisfaction out of it? Like, one company that I work closely with is a company called DeepSource. What they do is dynamic code analysis, basically figuring out, are there bugs in your code, are there security issues, things like that. And this has been done before, but what they did instead is, look, instead of telling people they have all these issues, like, why can't the product just fix them for you? So they built this auto fix engine. What it basically does is, whenever you open a pull request to like change your code, it scans to see if there's any issues. If there's any of them that they can fix, like the product is gonna open a pull request for you and fix them. No work is needed on your end. That's kind of like one of the magic moments about the product, So like, if you think about then structuring data as an organization to figuring out what to track, like one example is, what percentage of pull requests have an autofix enable? Like, what percentage of pull requests get merged without the person interacting with DeepSource? It used to be really important for like people to be data driven and product driven, so that they know really what matters, versus in the early days simply focusing on revenue, because for a lot of these products that might not be the metric you should be tracking. And the other thing is trusting the people. I see a lot of companies building data science teams, but not letting the data science person actually come up with the insights. Sometimes it's better for the practitioner to kind of take the lead, and then the business person kind of like review it. So I think those are like the two main things, like trust your team and like be product focused when understanding what you need to analyze.
So across all your 45 plus portfolio companies, each of which have their own growth strategy, and a big factor with determining whether they achieve or fall short is building the team and the infrastructure to help them scale. While many of the companies, I'm sure, are able to achieve, look, no doubt there's challenges along the way. And when you look at your involvement and looking across all 45 portfolio companies, hiring strategies is a critical component, and particularly in the tech side. What have you found most challenging in the current space when it comes to hiring data scientists, data engineers, machine learning engineers for your portfolio companies, and what's worked well for the ones who have been able to achieve that?
Yeah, I think like one of the main things is timing, So if you think about where we invest at the seed and Series A, a lot of times the company might not have a product out, so not a lot of data to work with. Other times they might have a few engineers, building a product. There's a few beta testers, but there's not a lot of kind of like skill to analyze. What really people get wrong, it's like the timing and bringing the person in. So like, if you wait to bring somebody on, like, you might end up having kind of like a data strategy on the collection side where your data is really messy. You might not be capturing the right fields. There's kind of like a lot there that you need an expert to put in place. So I think like the best companies that we've seen do it somewhat early, where they might have at least one person kind of like being brought on to start thinking, okay, like, we need to collect this data. We need to make sure we analyze these numbers. These are like some of the learnings I had at previous companies, like usually that's what works best, like hiring people that are like repeat employees, so to speak, in the same category, So like in security, if you have somebody who you're going to hire as a data scientist to do threat hunting, if it's the first job that they had, like there's kind of a learning curve there. If you're bringing somebody on who's more knowledgeable, they can kind of help you look around corners. So if you do have the opportunity to hire somebody who's done it before, like you should do it pretty early, even if you don't have like the actual data necessarily to build insights at scale, but like they can start help you build your practice. Because once you get also too far into the life cycle of your company, there's kind of like a cultural bias against like ripping out your processes and replacing them with more data-driven ones. So I think it's a balance, but it's hard to say for everyone what the best time to do it is. But I think like if I think back about some of the successes and some of the failures, it's like either doing it too early or too late. So I think it's something that should just be top of mind for founders and kind of like be opportunistic. That's what we always tell them. Like if you run across a very talented person, like don't necessarily overthink it that much, like just bring them on, because even if you just need them in 3 months, like it might be hard to find the same profile later on. So that's one of the things that comes to mind.
I think that's such an important message, because it's a trap that many companies fall into, which often we have to spend time working with them to avoid it and work around it. So being a little bit too early is a lot better than being too late because of the bottlenecks that can be caused. Looking then at your take on the skill sets and the individuals who are most in demand, your portfolio covers multiple industries, from healthcare to e-commerce and everything in between, with underlying thread, consumer tech, SaaS, infrastructure and security. Across the hiring that's required in those areas, when you think of the data team specifically, speaking now to the candidate audience, what advice have you got for individuals who are looking to start or looking to make the move from their first or second role and break into fast growing dynamic startups, many of which you're playing a role in? What are the important things that they could be aware of?
At this stage, the most important thing is like being flexible, So I think like I've seen two types of candidates kind of like come through the funnel. One is the more academia like template, so to speak, like somebody who has a very strong academic background, might have a master's, might have a PhD, but it might be their first operational role. Like in that case, people might get a little frustrated where how would you say it? The organization is not very sophisticated in how to do their work, so there's a bit of a mismatch between expectations and kind of like what actually happens. In that case, like it's more, you should probably learn from this person, and ideally this person should be aware that things are not going to be perfect. It's an iterative process, and I think like that's what should get them excited, like coming in, shaping the culture, and really making sure that going forward, this company becomes a very kind of like data-driven organization. The other, archetype, so to speak, is the person that might be self-taught. They might have done, like online courses. They might have kind of learned it themselves. Those are usually kind of like pretty good hires for early stage companies because they come into it with no preconceived notion of like what it should be. But you usually need to pair them with somebody who's a little more senior. So if I were, like somebody just starting in data science, I would probably just start doing work as a side project, So like one of the open source project I built, it's like a Ruby wrapper for like the MBA API, and I just started building some analysis on top of it. Like if you're just getting into the starboard, you kind of got to show people that you understand also the business and iterative side of it. So like say you really want to work at I don't know, Stripe, for example, like you could go out there and kind of like start building some analysis of payment data that like you found around the internet. It's kind of like really showing your potential kind of like employer that you really understand the category, and like your insights are going to be very useful, even though your resume might not show you are, a PhD in machine learning from kind of like a top university. So it really depends on the person that you are, kind of like your background. And, myself, I dropped out of college my senior year. Kind of like all of my work has kind of been proactive, kind of like doing the work to show people that I should get the opportunity. So I think that's really the thing, like while data science, it definitely sounds like jobs are in demand. There's no talent. I think like there's plenty of talent out there. I think it's just a matter of like making sure you attract the right kind of employer to be excited about yourself.
I think it's excellent advice because it really showcases that it's the extra steps and the passion and the being able to demonstrate real interest other than a job application can make a massive difference. And I think it's also good for you to highlight that, while you didn't finish the degree in question, it didn't prohibit you and you were able to overcome that while taking these other steps. And that's very helpful. And it's something that's not talked about enough. So Alessio, final question for me. What are you most excited about for 2021, looking at all the exciting things that are happening in your portfolio and what future opportunities are out there?
The most exciting thing that I see is like developers getting the respect as builders of value. I think like 10, 15 years ago, developers were kind of put in the room, like no windows, kind of like crank it out. I think like as the startup and tech world that's been evolving, developers have become much more prominent in an organization, and like Jeff Lawson, who was the CEO of Twilio, just wrote a book, Ask Your Developer, and he kind of talks about developers as the new creative. People think software engineering is a very analytical job where it's kind of like, you write the code, it does things, but there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of product ideation, problem solving. But I've seen this firsthand. So I think like one of the things that gets me excited is like developers being at the center of the business thinking and like helping drive product vision and getting more budget to actually be productive, and as consumers, like we should be excited because the products that we use should be working better. They should have better design. They should be more reliable. I think this is going to be one of the major shifts this decade. Like if legacy software that like previously was very unusable, like if you think about, I don't know, your online banking, it's probably not great compared to like some of the neobanks. But I think over the next decade, like legacy players are going to start to wake up to that. Like their engineering quality is going to grow. Engineers are going to get more recognition, and this is going to lead to just better software for everybody, which I think, it's a net positive for the whole population.
Absolutely. Excellent. Well, Alessio, thank you again for coming on, sharing your story, talking about 645 and offering advice to people who are looking to advance in their career. And we look forward to all of the great work that you're going to do in the future. So thank you again.
Thanks for JP. Really, really enjoyed the conversation.
AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Alldus offer an exec search program. Alldus can help you discover how data science and AI can transform your company. With our unrivaled network of C-suite executives and senior AI professionals, we offer retained search services across the US and Europe. Get the Alldus advantage. Become a member of the Alldus community and enjoy some of the following: AI meetups. Once a month, our community gathers to listen to some of the leading experts in the world of data science and AI. Our speakers come from all over the world, including Dublin, Boston, and Frankfurt. We also have our AI mentors. Our experts will provide mentoring to Alldus members. And don't forget our AI in Action podcast. Each week we have guests from all over the world talking us through their education, career, and more. Become an Alldus member and get the Alldus advantage. For more information and to sign up for our newsletter, log on to www.alldus.com. That's www.alldus.com. Alldus International, empowering through AI.